Hi everyone, I'm Anya. Welcome back to my channel. This is the third installment of my series on what I learned about writing from Star Wars. I realized I totally lied in the first video in this series. There's actually going to be 4 of them. And the reason for that is because I realized that Rogue One, the main takeaway that I got from it was actually a really big question that I and a lot of writers I think struggle with, and that is when and how and should you kill your main characters? It probably goes without saying, but this is a very spoilery video, so watch at your own risk. So the first thing that people say, a lot of people when I talk to them about Rogue One, was like, oh my god, it was so sad. And that made me question, why was it sad instead of just being annoying or apathetic, as I think it sometimes can be when creators kill off their main characters. And I think Rogue One is a great example of 3 things that are really helpful to think about and to try to make sure you do if you do decide to kill off your main characters. So number 1, make sure they have a complete arc. Or if they don't, make sure you can see where their arc was going so that it's tragic that they were killed off and they never got to complete it. I think the main takeaway for me was that if it feels like you killed them in order to avoid developing their character or grappling with hard questions with that character, it's just going to feel unsatisfying rather than sad. So in Jin's case, she starts out not really being dedicated to the cause. You know, maybe she's just trying to get by. Maybe she's motivated by the personal reason of trying to find her father. But then she learns about the risks and the sacrifices that her dad made when he was trying to fight against the Empire on a really broad scale. And at the same time, she's developing personal relationships and bonds with Cassian and the others. And then by the end of the movie, she sacrifices her own life voluntarily for the sake of the cause. And in fact, she takes on a pretty strong leadership role in the mission. So you can see her character arc sort of rising until she gets to the point where she's really wholeheartedly fighting against the Empire. And you can imagine what she would continue to do and go on to do if she were to be able to continue that fight. And so that's why it's so painful and so tragic that she gets cut down before we see where any of that would go. So number 2, make sure they die for a reason. I sort of mean this in 2 senses. The first is that they die for a cause. So in this case, Jin and Cassian are dying for the cause of getting the Death Star plans to the rebels, which will eventually enable the rebels to win this huge victory over the Empire. And I think it's really especially satisfying because they're the sort of missing link in the story that readers are so familiar with. And it connects right up to the part at the beginning of episode 4 where you see Leia fleeing in Tantive 4. Audiences can see exactly how this sacrifice, the deaths of Jin and Cassian, leads up to the events that they're so familiar with in the following movies chronologically. And audiences know exactly where this fits into the narrative and what it allows the other characters to accomplish. Of course, it is sometimes really effective to have characters die fruitlessly for a cause, but I think even in those cases, it's so important to have a cause, even if it ends up falling through in the end. And then the second part of what I mean by making sure they die for a reason is making sure that it would be unrealistic for them to escape. So in this case, the Imperial base on Scarif is incredibly heavily guarded, and it literally gets blasted by the Death Star. So there's a reason why the characters have to die. It would be completely ridiculous if they somehow managed to escape after that. And again, like with the last point, I think there is some room here as far as extra tragedy when characters die needlessly. Like say a character dies in some random accident after a war has been won. But I think Rogue One really showed me how powerful and how tragic it is if you're killing your main characters, if their deaths just feel really inevitable, like there was no escape for them. Point number 3, make sure they're actually dead. I think this relates to what I was just saying, but if you're going to kill characters, and especially main characters, I think Rogue One is a great reminder that you shouldn't bring them back to life unless you have a really, really, really good reason. I think there's this tendency to make light of death because creators and authors are always like, yeah, like I'll just bring them back to life, it's fine. But I think that has the effect of making audiences and readers make light of death as well. And so when you do kill a character, even if you kill them for real, it doesn't have the same emotional impact because part of the reader's mind is always thinking, oh, like maybe they'll just come back later. Like it just doesn't have the same oomph to it when you do kill a character. But in Rogue One, you can see that the droid K2SO and Jin and Cassian and all the others, they're actually dead. And you know that there's no chance that they're going to come back to life later. And, you know, what do you notice about that? People are really sad, so it's really effective. And a side note, also relating to Star Wars, but I think Han Solo's death was a really great example of all three of these strategies. And conversely, that weird thing in episode 8 where Leia like floats out of the ship and then pulls herself back subconsciously with the Force or whatever, like that I think was a bad example of this, and especially the part where, you know, you shouldn't bring people back to life for no reason. I think it would have been so emotionally effective if in that moment she had just been dead, but because she was brought back to life at that point, I feel like, at least for me, I had less of an emotional reaction when she actually did die in episode 9. Because we'd already been through this scene where, you know, maybe she was dead, but then she was back to life. So Rogue One, as a writer, I think this was a really great example of thinking really carefully and critically about the decision to kill off your main characters and making that a very heavy decision, a very purposeful decision, and one that's not taken lightly. I'm definitely guilty of frivolously killing off characters, so I think these three things, giving them a plot arc, making sure they die for a reason, and not bringing them back to life, I think these three things are so important and helpful for me to keep in mind as I think about whether I should even be killing people off. So as we close out, I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, about Rogue One, and about this question of killing main characters. Let me know in the comments, and if you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Thank you all so much for watching and for joining me on this somewhat unexpected tangent into Rogue One. The next video in this series will be about the sequels, and it will actually be the last video in this series, so I will look forward to seeing you then. Bye.